Dr. McManus, your brother died 34 years ago. The book is being released this month. When did you start writing the letters that form the book's content?
Okay, so this is really interesting because he was murdered in 1992. I was a first-year student at Jefferson Medical College, my first year. And this happened on Christmas Eve, and by, January 3rd, I was back in school. So I just put it away from me and, kept on going. I felt like if I wavered from the track that I was on, then I would make it, And, my brother and I had already lost our mother when we were teenagers, and then my grandmother shortly after, who we went to live with. So I had a lot of things in my grief bag. So I put it away from me, and then I think this was in 2018, I've moved on with my life. I have a career. I'm a family practice doc. I'm married. I have 5 kids. I was always driving someone somewhere or doing something. And one day I rode past a sign in my neighborhood that said, community writing course. So I said, I think I'm going to sign up for that. It's only 6 weeks, and if I'm terrible, I can just drop out after that. And I went, and what I found is every time I sat down to write, I was talking about our growing up in North Philly, my grandmother, our whole childhood. So that kind of started me on the path of just writing. Even though I was an English major in college, I had no plans to be a writer. I wanted security, and I wanted to have a sure bet. So medicine seemed like more of a sure bet than being a writer. But I always loved to read. So anyway, fast forward to 2020, I'm in a course, and it's a book in a year. And I said, well, before I write a story growing up, let me just learn. I'm going to write a fiction story. And then it was March 2020. COVID happened. I'm working at an outpatient clinic. I don't know what I'm being exposed to. And I said, you know what? I could die. I better write this story down right now. So that year, 2020, back and forth from the clinic, I kind of found, I guess some solace, some peace in going back over my childhood. So I finished that manuscript, which covered the time up until my mom passed away when I was 14 and my brother was 12. And it was just a rough draft, something I had written for myself. But afterwards, I had this burn, I wanted to just talk to my brother. It wasn't even like I'm gonna write to him now. I just wanted to talk to him. So I found myself writing a series of letters about all kinds of things, about our past growing up, about my present without him, about everything in between. And a friend of mine, after a while, she said, I think you've kind of written a book. You have 20 to 25 things. So then I went back and I looked at them and I ordered them, and that became this, Brother Epistles.
Wow. Now, is this your first book?
This is my first published book. I have 2 other manuscripts in the works, but this is the first one that's gone to press.
Why did you want to share your story and your brother's story?
Okay, so I felt like when my brother was murdered, that there was this feeling that people blamed him for his own murder. Like it was his fault. Well, if he hadn't been here at so-and-so time, he brought this on himself. I just kind of felt that, I got a sense of that. And, by writing the story, it really helped me see, which I also know as a physician, all these structural and society determinants that funnel young Black men like my brother towards urban gun violence, towards homicide. It's the number 1 cause of death for young Black males, age 15 and 24. More than the next 9 combined. And, my brother was murdered in 1992. And that's still the case in 2026. So I felt like it was important to share his story. And also, you hear statistics, you see a clip on the news, but you never get the story of the person and the people and the humanity. And I felt like, I want people to see the human, to feel the story, and I think if people feel, they may be moved to action and moved to really do the things that we need to do to not have this gun violence crisis anymore.
Why did you choose to format the book as a series of letters, or as you say, epistles?
I think there's something about the letter form. Inherent in writing a letter is you just can't talk to the person. You can't go. So there's a distance implied in the form. And they've been used since ancient times. Half of the New Testament is in letters. And so I felt like the letter form gave me access to this liminal space between memory and time and even death. I felt like I could cross to where my brother was and have a conversation. And also the form lends itself to a certain intimacy, vulnerability. I wrote things in this book, and my husband, we've been married over 30 years, he was like, I didn't know that. So I think it's something about writing in that letter form that kind of lends itself.
Now, obviously, most readers did not get a chance to meet your brother. If you were to write a blurb about him, how would you describe him to strangers?
Okay, very handsome. All the girls were always after him, and he could just tease you so bad, but in such a good way that you would laugh at yourself. Like, he was one of the only persons that could get me to not be so serious and laugh. So, very fun-loving guy and extremely loyal. Like, my brother, if he was with you, he was with you. If you were outnumbered, didn't matter. He would still stand with you back to back. So that's what I would want people to know.
Now, as your book is dropping this month, Philadelphia and the nation are experiencing record declines in shootings and homicides and much improved clearance rates for solving shootings. What are your thoughts on what's driving the downward trend in shootings?
Well, I think that there's enough research and enough successful interventions that knowledge is being shared, like nationwide. One thing that we know that works are hospital intervention programs. When someone is involved in a shooting and survives, if the hospital gets on that and provides them with the support and services, then that prevents that person from coming in and being a homicide victim the next time. And also community interventions where you're mobilizing the community to identify hot spots and hot people who may be involved. I think that those interventions are very, very effective. And also using the police and partnering with the police and having police do things like get illegal guns off the streets. Those things work. And so I think all of that together and being coordinated, all of those parts, the healthcare providers, the police, the politicians, the community, all of those people have to work together so we can drive those rates down. And I think that's some of what we're seeing in Philadelphia.
Okay. Now, your brother's murder remains unsolved. Do you have hopes, or was it one of your goals that the book may spark new interest from police or even witnesses that could result in the case being solved?
I would love that, okay? I would love that. A few years ago, I tried to contact the Philadelphia Police Department. They have a cold case department. And I really didn't get anywhere. But this person, no, the files are in storage, or that person, it just went nowhere. So I would love that because I think that clearing the cases, that's another thing that leads to reduction. One, people feel like, okay, there's accountability. If my loved one or someone I know is murdered, there's a high likelihood that they get caught and put in jail. That makes people more likely to come forward with information. And also, it may be a bit of a deterrent, for people who find themselves in a situation where they're thinking about shooting people. They can think about the consequences. So I think that that's an recognized way that you can combat gun violence by clearing the old cases.
Okay. Now, the Philadelphia community that you grew in is where?
It's North Philly.
North Philly.
North Philly, my grandmom's house was our home base right around 22nd and Lehigh. Anyone knows the old Connie Mack Stadium? Right across the street was
Right
like
there.
4 little houses, little bar in the corner, and and so that's where we grew up. We lived all around the city, but that was our home base.
Now, that community produced a doctor, you, and also produced victims and perpetrators of violent crime, your brother being one of the victims. What do you believe are the primary factors that derailed your brother and so many other young black men?
I think there's a lot of factors. One, I think they're not given a chance to be boys a lot of times. They're criminalized in school, targeted for harsher discipline, and subject to a lot of unfairness. My brother was in the military, and, he went into the military because when he was 17, because his girlfriend was pregnant and he wanted to provide for her and the baby. So he thought that that's an opportunity to economically provide. He goes into the service and he does not like it at all. What he had to say was, he was in the Army. What he had to say was, if you're not white, it's not right. And he couldn't wait to get out. So then he gets out a few years later and he's putting in for jobs all over the city. All over the city. He even got accepted to a program at UPenn for veterans, but the acceptance came after he had already died.
Wow.
So he's in this space. By now he has 2 young sons. And it just seemed like selling drugs was a nice bridge until he could get something. And I think the neighborhoods that is concentrated in and that's presented as an option to our young black men is largely at fault, and not having the economic opportunities or the family cushions to, kind of support you until you get to where you had like a full-time job, support you in education or otherwise.
Yeah. Now, Dr. McManus, your publisher notes that your book examines gun violence as a public health crisis.
Yes.
So what remedies would you offer for this problem?
Well, one is to mobilize the communities that this takes place. If you look at Philadelphia, a map, you could identify the hot spots, places where gun violence, homicides are concentrated. Target those communities. Figure out who are the would-be shooters, who need urgent intervention, and who are the someday shooters. Younger people who need to do things like stay in school. If you keep a young man in school, that's a great deterrent for him being murdered, like him just being in school. So attacking things like truancy, so those sorts of concentrated efforts are things that really, really can work and make a difference and have been shown nationwide to change the course, And so you can save one person's son or brother, and by doing that, make the whole neighborhood safer. It's definitely worth doing.
Okay. In researching and writing your book, what's something that you learned about yourself and your brother that you didn't know before?
I think that is a really interesting question. What I didn't really see before, because I was in the story, I was the person, at how many factors were just against me and my brother, where we grew up, where not having a park nearby, having not feeling safe walking back and forth to the corner store. All those things really stack the odds against us. And so before I just thought, oh well, it's my family's like bad luck. But no, there's all these structural things that kind of target us and really especially for my brother, make it more likely that he would die by homicide than other people. So I think I really did not see that clearly until I went through, and of course now I'm also a physician, and I've learned about the social determinants of health and those things. But I think until I went back into our story and looked at how we grew up, what our supports were, what they want, I was able to see it. And, it really kind of gave me a little bit of peace, because, it wasn't his fault, all his fault,
Indeed. Thank you. In the letters addressed to your brother that make up the substance of the book, you write about a range of topics from your musical taste then and now, how his death impacted you then and now, about the grief that the two of you shared upon the loss of your mother and your grandmother, about you marrying interracially, about his sons and their trials and tribulations. It's a lot, 30 plus years. How did you narrow down what memories and reflections to include in the book?
I didn't have like a very scientific process. It was just kind of what came out, what the story was, what I wanted to say, kind of just filling them in. Guess what happened, and you wouldn't believe this, and just kind of filling my brother in. And then, when I structured the book, I included things that had a direct touch with my brother in his life. Like I have a chapter in there about mothers, Black mothers in particular, and their sons. And that relates to my brother and my mother, which he lost when he was just 12, and also me now with my son. So I think, definitely things that I felt like had a dual perspective, my present and our past, and kind of uniting kind of around it.
Mm-hmm. Okay. And does your book have a target audience in your mind?
There's lots of targets. I think that a wider target is, people in the healthcare field that deal with, in particular, Black populations affected by gun violence, so they can see the people that this is a story of a family. This is a story of a brother and a sister, really humanizing beyond the statistics. But also for people who have had lost family members or friends or know of, so they can a little bit see some of their story and maybe some of the things that I came to know through writing, that they can also know and maybe have a measure of comfort through that. And also I think grief, anyone who's experienced grief, but a lot of this book is about the repeating loop of grief and how, for me, and I think for many people, grief is not over. It's not something you get through in 5 steps and just put away. I can think of something about my brother right now, and I just feel it, and I want to cry, So I think that needs to be in the conversation, that it's okay to grieve 100 years later, and have people feel kind of validated in that.
Okay. What new knowledge do you want your readers to take away after reading the book?
I think the new knowledge, or the underlying knowledge, is that this is still very much present and current. And a lot of the things that led to my brother being murdered are leading to young men being murdered today, now, as I speak. So there is an urgency. It's a crisis. It's like, come on, let's turn on the lights. Let's do something, and not say, oh, it's just hopeless, or that's just the way it is, or apathy. So that's really what I would like it to do, to help people who don't know and don't live in those spaces know how current and present it is right now.
Does your work as an assistant professor of family medicine give you insight into the gun violence problem?
I think it's more in the public health literature. And at Hackensack Meridian School of Medicine, where I teach in a course called Human Dementia. And it's focused on all the structural determinants of health. So when I'm teaching medical students, part of my work is to say, hey, this health problem doesn't exist in isolation. If we take these people living in these places with these forces, that's what leads them to the path. So that's true for gun violence, but it's true for many other diseases too. So that's kind of how it dovetails.
How does Philadelphia today compare to the city that you grew up in and where your brother passed?
Okay, so I think that's really interesting because, he passed in 92, and the city wasn't as nice as it is in certain places. There's been a lot of revitalization, especially in and around Center City. My brother and I used to travel, from North Philly to West Philly, so we went through Center City, and, so it was a little dodgy sometimes. And now I go to Center City and I'm just walking around and I'm like, wow, it's safe and it's nice, So I think that was something that's different, that it seems like, it's coming up. But then I go to the neighborhood where I grew up and it looks the same. It looks the same. So you have some areas that have been invested in and they're revitalized. In other areas, the poverty, the disenfranchisement is still very much concentrated.
Now, professionally, what's next for you?
What's next for me? Well, I am going to do more teaching in and around narrative medicine, using literature in healthcare to make better providers, but also teaching patients how to kind of advocate for themselves by telling their own stories. So a lot of that work involves teaching medical students, residents, and actually other faculty members how to employ the techniques and methods of narrative to provide better care. And I'm working on a new book, and it's all about kind of what we believe about disease. When I was younger, my mom was sick. She was diagnosed with ovarian cancer, stage 4. She was only 24. And my grandmother, who came from Southwest Georgia, just would say, somebody done worked the roots on us. And I didn't really know. I had kind of an idea. So that comment really got me thinking about that whole tradition of hoodoo and conjure and belief systems about illness and luck, and how does that affect outcomes, care, and what does that do for patients? So I'm exploring and working on that.